right, almost the end of January, and we're still going here. I can't believe the year's just already flying by. We're on the verge of tax season, on the verge of spring training. There's a lot going on, and this week's no different. We've got earnings coming. We've got a Fed meeting. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other things. There's all kinds of stuff going on. So I think there's no shortage of things for us to talk about today. But, there's been a lot of talk out there just around stuff like, what's a soft landing? Are we worried about the debt ceiling? What's a short seller? We're seeing these news topics across the board. And so I thought it'd be good, maybe even just to go through a couple of these different things, Justin, and just talk about what are these terms as clients that are listening hear these in the media. How do we think about them? There's probably a pretty good guess if you've been listening to us for a while, but they aren't things that we just put our head in the sand, right? We still pay attention to, and we still have a perspective on. So, maybe even starting with what's a soft landing. I think that ties into Fed rates. Like maybe just even start there. Define like what's a hard landing? What's a soft landing? What the heck are they even talking about?
Well, hard landing's one you feel. I've got my radio voice on today, so apologies if I sound off. I mean, short of it, soft landing is the Fed basically organizing or orchestrating is maybe a better word, a coordinated, controlled slowdown in the economy to a point where it does not go into a recession. That's my own definition. I don't think there's a textbook definition, although probably there is a textbook definition or a textbook out there that tries to specify it. But what the topic is being brought up to touch on is because of what the Fed has done in interest rates skyrocketing to combat inflation, typically interest rates going up slows down the economy. It increases the cost of borrowing. In the simplest term, hey, mortgage rates are a lot higher than they were 6 months ago, 12 months ago. And so that pushes down demand. I'm using that as a very isolated example, but extrapolate that across the economy and it pushes down demand. The Fed is trying to thread this needle to push down demand so it can push down inflation, but do so in a way that it doesn't crash the economy to a hard landing. And why this is coming up in the news right now is that the more recent data appears to support this soft landing narrative, whereas it was only, 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were talking about right before we got on. I think we had a discussion. Are we in a recession? What does that mean? Et cetera, et cetera. Now the narrative hasn't completely changed, but it's changed fairly dramatically in the span of really 3-4 weeks. And that's one thing I love about this industry and this job is there really is never a dull moment. You kind of teed that up at the outset. There's always an interesting dynamism in the market and things change incredibly quickly. There's a lot of data that is coming out. We're recording this earlier in the week. We'll know a lot of this by the time I think this gets released. We'll have some clarity. And it could totally change.
Sure.
It literally could change by the end of this week because of the potential magnitude of some of this data coming down the pike.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, right? Information travels super fast. It's very efficient. So we've talked about this before, but trying to guess where things are going to go and, is one thing. Trying to get that right is, hey, what does the Fed say? How does the market react? All those types of things. Yeah. But then there's the execution piece of it, which is even more difficult, right, at times. So I think you could get lucky and get it right, but then actually executing upon that luck a lot of times is pretty difficult. And so that's why it does tie back to financial structure, as you guys are probably catching on by now, but it's why we build the portfolios in the way that we build them, is really understanding everybody's priorities. Everybody's different, and we know what it costs to fund those priorities. And then we match that up and building a very unique, customized portfolio to people. And, one question we got over the past couple of weeks is, hey, everybody does goal-based planning. That doesn't seem too novel. And yeah, we totally agree. And it was several years ago that we quote unquote kind of saw the light. I think, for a long time, and that's what the industry teaches is, hey, do this goal-based planning, do something called a Monte Carlo, give yourself a percentage, an 80% chance or 90% chance of success. And I think it's what hit us is there's a better way, right? There's a better way to actually understand specifically what the priorities are, what those priorities are going to cost to actually fund, and then build a portfolio around that. So it is different than what the industry talks about, goal-based planning. And maybe in the coming weeks, we can dig into it deeper. But I did want to address just that when you are seeing all these news events, kind of the Fed is moving things around, et cetera, we're taking a very tailored approach to building that protective reserve. And allowing you to be, conservative where you need to be conservative, and as risky, if you want to call it that, or growth oriented is probably the better way of putting it in the best way possible as well.
Yeah, completely. I think just piggybacking on the topic briefly of goal-based planning, I think, like you said, we'll get into a little bit more nuance and detail of that. But typically what happens is that leads to a cookie cutter type approach where portfolios are literally just grabbed off the shelf. Is that terrible? No, I won't be, too hard on that. But you use the word, there's a better way. And that really is where that led us to a liability driven or priorities driven approach and custom portfolios. We'll get into the neat details of all this stuff, but those custom portfolios allow far better outcomes. They should allow far better outcomes and allow investors and clients to weather the storm, whether or not we have a soft landing, going back to the kind of topic of the day, soft landing or hard landing. It's a more, I use the term robust. I think it's a more, there's more confidence. There's more strength is a good word to use in that approach to give that staying power, to have it uniquely dialed into each and every individual. No two people are the same. And our industry does kind of view people like that, right? You get a risk tolerance score, or you look at your age, and you do see take into account your goals and things like that. But it's only, I don't know, 75% of the way there. If you want to slap a number on it, that's an unscientific number. But really the way we view it is it's a more wholesome, qualitative and confidence inducing approach.
Yeah. And I think it's a good point. Like, most financial firms are built to scale, and that's great, right? You need to put together advice for masses. And so this kind of more cookie cutter approach is not, like you said, it's not bad. It's just kind of the element of where they're at. For our clients listening, that's the benefit of the multifamily office, a little bit more attention to detail with your specific situation. Yeah. We're going to build a very customized approach to you because we don't have to do it for 1,000 clients like a lot of firms, do, and provide a very valuable service to that clientele. But it is something that does become afforded to you as your wealth grows and you're able to work with, a firm like ours. Yeah. So I think that's a good thing to.
One thing just to kind of wrap up the goals-based topic we're talking about here. I was actually in San Francisco last week meeting with some venture capitalists, met with one of them and was having this conversation. How do we construct portfolios? How do we allocate to venture capital, et cetera, et cetera? Pulled up our platform in which we do this and kind of walked him through it. He's like, oh, wow, that's a lot more sophisticated than, even kind of he does his money management. So just a little bit of a teaser. Know that there's a lot of thought, a lot of sophistication that goes into a more priorities driven, liabilities driven, custom tailor-made approach.
And I think what it ultimately might be able to provide in a lot of scenarios is, if you have a really good understanding of how your portfolio can be constructed, going back to the conservative where you need to be conservative, you have that right protective reserve in place. You can then maybe have some confidence to reallocate money towards higher expected returns. And you start to think about the compounding effect of that over time, right? Like if you have money sitting in, let's say, treasury bonds, when that money could be allocated to the US stock market for a long period of time. I mean, we're talking about exponential difference, millions of dollars of difference
over long periods,
depending on the size of your portfolio. So it really does pay to get very sophisticated. And that's our job, right? That's not you guys listening and gals listening to this is, hey, I need to know specifically how much to be allocated to. That's our job, to understand your priorities, interpret that, and then optimize that portfolio so you do get access to those returns that you deserve.
Well, and then hopefully in these conversations on this podcast and even one-on-one conversations, we give that the context to why the portfolio is built the way it is. And it hopefully gives you that staying power when we're talking about, or you're reading about, okay, are we going to be in a soft landing or a hard landing? Are we going to hit the debt ceiling, right? Yeah. There's all sorts of headlines around that. markets typically do okay when there's a defined date. That's why you've seen markets rally. It's kind of shrugged off this whole debt ceiling debate. I think that's a little bit more of a political gamesmanship, at least right now. But these are scary headlines, and it's okay. It's natural to react to them. But if you understand, and we really want to emphasize that, call us, shoot us a text. We gave you guys the number. Ask the question so you have that confidence and understanding. We don't want you to be experts and be able to do this yourself, right? That's what we enjoy and what we love talking about on a day-to-day basis. But we want you to see those headlines and understand how it applies to your portfolio and give you that confidence and that staying power to realize those long-term returns.
I think that's a fantastic point. And I think as we look at this week ahead, you're likely to see a lot of volatility. Because there's a lot of information coming, and we know that the markets, if they're functioning well, they're going to develop that, or they're going to absorb that information. They're going to adjust prices to reflect the available information. So don't be surprised if you see everything bounce all over the place, but hopefully through this discussion and your discussions, with advisors, et cetera, you have a lot of confidence in knowing that, hey, even when all hell seems to be breaking loose, or maybe not, maybe it's all great news and everything goes up, or maybe it's terrible news and everything goes down. You have a financial structure in place that's very specific to your priorities, and it allows for the best, most optimized return over time, which is ultimately your personalized benchmark of achieving your priorities, because money is just a tool, as we all know. So we'll wrap up for today. But again, Justin just mentioned it. We got that phone number you can text with questions. I'll just remind it again. It's 602-704-5574. We'd love to hear from you guys, and we'd love to tackle some of your questions and topics in future episodes. So until next time, own your wealth, make an impact, and always be a pro.
The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific, individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.